I'm Professor Hanson, and in the spirit of developing lifelong learners through diverse and inclusive instruction and presentations, I am pleased to welcome the 9th Industry Hour speaker, Admiral Ann Phillips, our Maritime Administrator. I would like to welcome Admiral Phillips, and please kindly present your questions in the chat, and I will address them at the end of Administrator Phillips' presentation. Also, please mute your speakers so that we can minimize any noise distractions. Moving on, I would like to invite Kings Point Superintendent, Vice Admiral Noonan, who will introduce Administrator Phillips. Thank you, Admiral Noonan.
Thank you, Professor Hanson. Good afternoon, colleagues and midshipmen. A few weeks ago, when I introduced Rear Admiral Phillips at our school-wide Embark seminar, I called her the driving force behind a new standard of excellence in American shipping. That remains true. But today, she will provide a broader view of the challenges facing the Maritime Administration. When we talked about Embark and shipping industry facing the same personnel problems our military has been tackling, we had cause for optimism. The solutions are right in front of us. They would require some time and effort. We have cause for similar optimism regarding the other challenges Admiral Phillips is about to discuss. She will share examples of progress made despite limited resources, and you will see that she and MARAD are effectively anticipating strategic interest in our merchant marine. History tells us that concern over our maritime strength comes in surges. Today, I introduce to you the steady hand on the helm in all weathers, Rear Admiral Ann Phillips.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Admiral Noonan, for that very kind and generous introduction. Certainly, it's an honor to be here with all of you today for Industry Hour. Many thanks to the class of 1969, and particularly to Professor Hanson, who has coordinated this effort, but also worked with us on, and me in particular, on how to move forward with our conversation this afternoon. So we're very grateful for that, and very grateful for the opportunity to speak with all of you today. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. If I had a choice, it would not be virtual, but I spent today and had committed to spending the morning with the Navy League here in Washington, D.C., and having a very similar discussion, actually. And for those of you, particularly for the midshipmen who have not heard of the Navy League, at some point in your career, I think you will. And I hope you will find benefit in interacting with that organization, both here in the US, but also when you sail the 7 seas, because you will find them around the world. And they are always very gracious to US mariners and to Navy mariners. So as I move forward today, I thought about what today's conversation was going to be. I realized that I spend an awful lot of time talking to the regiment about more about current events, I guess I would say, Embark and the NDAA. We're just up there for the 23rd of January for a major session with the Coast Guard. But I haven't talked too much about what we're doing here at the Maritime Administration that is going to impact your future and opportunities you have. And I would say, kind of building on Admiral Noonan's comments this afternoon, the future in your case is very bright. You are greatly needed in the US flag fleet. There are many choices on which you may sail, for which you may sail, many opportunities that are going to come your way.
This is the new Maritime Administrator.
Hello. And for the midshipmen who are graduating this year and those within the next few years, know that opportunities for you will be tremendous, and you will have lots of choices and some new and interesting choices, I think, coming your way to sail, to fulfill your commitment to sail US flag, but then to work in the industry long term. So you're kind of in the catbird seat as a lot of things are changing in the industry for the better. So as I start off today, back to the Navy League, an organization originally founded with the help of President Roosevelt, who understood the importance of American sea power, as many of you know from history in high school or beyond. He also assembled the nation's first very large fleet which was critical to extending American power from land to sea in that era. His fleet consisted of more than a dozen battleships, and each was painted white to signify it was a peacetime armada, and sailed around the globe, visiting 20 major ports along the way, as an introduction of American sea power to the world stage. And what was unique about the vessels was not only were they painted white, but they were very ornately finished, and so were quite a spectacle to behold as they steamed along together. So the globe, the world, is the same today from a size perspective as it was then, but of course technology and geopolitics have made our tipping points tilt faster, and things happen much more quickly. Technology certainly has evolved to a point where we don't have steam coal-fired battleships anymore, thankfully. We've moved on to that, and we're moving on to new things too. But the world is something you'll hear today because it's also changing in regard to the maritime industry. In fact, COVID has really helped that along, I think. And it's important to understand your place in it as you think about leaving the academy and your future beyond the academy. Someday that will happen, and for some of you, it's coming up very quickly. So today, when I was at the Navy League this morning, I was in a room filled with senior naval officers, some retired Master Chief Petty Officers of the Navy, sailors, mariners who conducted operations in support of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and who spent most of their adult lives at sea, at war, in peacetime, executing training exercises, but all really as a part of a revered responsibility to the country and the belief in the values for which it stands. They came this morning to hear me talk about vessels and the capabilities that we need to move supplies, the standard beans, bombs, bullets, and fuel around the globe that are essential to winning our next fight. And they came to hear about bursting through bottlenecks in our supply chains and building back our shipyards. And I think I see some questions on that might have come in, so we might address that later. More importantly, though, they came to hear me talk about you. And one reason is because of the critical understanding of the need for mariners, particularly licensed mariners, and because you are the future of the maritime industry as we start to enter, I believe, an era of change. It's probably hard to see that sometimes. It's been pretty chilly up there. Get up early in the morning, do your PT, whatever your morning routine is. Days filled with exams and projects and room inspections and all of those such things. But someday, pretty soon, in some cases, you're going to leave the academy, and you will become leaders of industry in your future. And you should understand, as you take that step, that the leaders of industry and military understand how important and how vital the Merchant Marine Academy is as a core component of our interest and dominance on the high seas in trade and defense. And they understand the potential you bring to the world and the demands that you will have upon it that will change the way we think about national security, economic growth, and superior sea power. Potential, I would say, you could refer to it as a common denominator for all of you, but it is only part of the fraction. The rest of it is based on really the numerator of opportunity. And so as you think about your future, think for a minute about the next steps in your journey as a midshipman. Again, there's a world of opportunity out there waiting for you on the high seas and beyond. So wherever the journey takes you, and you've heard me say this before, take the most challenging, the most technically challenging opportunity that presents itself to you, and know that you're going to play a critical role in a world that is larger than yourselves, and you will be valued for that service. As an example, you might find yourself standing on the deck of a zero or low emission ship, or moving freight faster and more efficiently than before in a different kind of context or vessel than we see today. You might be joining the armed services. You might be on an aircraft carrier. You might be flying off one. You might be working on a new offshore wind facility, and you might be working in an American shipyard. I know there's a question about that too. So whatever path you choose, you will be making a difference, and your service is vitally needed and critically important. During my career, I was fortunate to be able to sail really to the far corners of the world. I've sailed 5 of the 7 seas, never been above the Arctic Circle, and never been in the Antarctic region, although I've been in the Roaring 40s. As an ensign in some circumstances, and much more senior officer later on. And I wish I could shut my computer down and people could emailing me, but that never happens. So you all know that too in today's connected world. So as an example, during my career, I had an opportunity to respond with the US and NATO in support of earthquake relief in Pakistan. I had the thrill of commanding a large multinational exercise in the Baltic Sea twice and sailing with superbly professional allies and partners, which I have to say for me personally was one of the most rewarding things I have had an opportunity to do. I had a chance to commission a brand new destroyer with an amazing and incredibly capable crew. And I had the chance to meet young children at an orphanage in a school in South America and to spend the day with them, learn from them and their teachers, and help make their surroundings safer and more beautiful with my crew on Mustin. So all of these things can be in your future in one way or another, and many more besides. And so, as I said earlier, usually I talk to you about things specific to USMMA, to the Merchant Marine Academy, but today I want to talk more about what we're doing here in MARAD and in the maritime industry to execute our mission, foster, promote, and develop the maritime industry of the United States. So I'll start with some things I said this morning. First, quoting Alfred Thayer Mahan, control of the sea by maritime commerce and naval supremacy together means predominant influence in the world. And to be clear, our US flagged and commercially operated vessels and our shipyards are essential to ensuring our nation remains a maritime nation. I talked about our mission, and you should know that within DOT, Department of Transportation, we are a very unique agency because we are both operational and promotional. And the department does understand how critical our nation is to national defense and to economic security. I work closely as administrator with both DOD and DOT, and particularly with General Van Ovost, who I know some of you have had the honor to hear speak there. She spoke at last year's graduation, the commander of US Transportation Command. Also within the Navy, we work with Vice Admiral Rick Williamson, head of the fleet logistics folks, and also with Rear Admiral Mike Wetlaufer, head of Military Sealift Command, to understand our nation's needs and meet our evolving sealift needs as well. We were honored to have General Van Ovost speak again at graduation last year, and I want to quote some things she said just to remind you, because graduation is a day that most people aren't paying much attention, rightfully so. So first, as a maritime nation, our national security depends on the merchant marine. Another quote from General Van Ovost, she warned graduates that they are about to face challenges our country has not encountered since World War II. And again, quoting, contested waters will stress our logistics lines all the way from home port to our destination. We have to be able to meet this challenge. And to do that, it's critical to realize there is an essential interdependence between the commercial elements of the maritime industry and the military elements of the maritime industry. So General Van Ovost was here last week. For those of you who don't know, we testify before Congress together each year. We talk about our budgets and our requirements, in particular in front of the House Armed Services Committee. We will be doing that on March 28th, and we are starting to prepare already. So she spent about an hour with us and emphasized again that she needs us to be ready to fight tonight if needed. And frankly, I need her to help ensure we have an understanding across government, at the legislative and executive branch, and within the Department of Defense of the critical sealift capabilities we must have to unilaterally provide sealift in peace, crisis, and war, so that we can guarantee logistics capabilities to place combat power at the place and time of our choosing anywhere on the globe. And I'm quoting the language from actually our code, our legislation in this context, to unilaterally provide sealift in peace, crisis, and war. Against this backdrop, I'll talk about 3 areas that we really face challenges in and what we're doing there. Mariner availability, which we've spoken of already today, and industry culture. Recapitalizing our ready reserve force and our sealift force, and keeping older ships ready to sail, because that's what we have to work with today in some cases. MARAD is at all of these overlapping intersections, working to strengthen the sealift enterprise by helping to recruit, train, and retain the next generation of mariners, particularly at the Merchant Marine Academy, where you all are, but also at state maritime academies and other schools and training centers around the country. Managing operations of our government-owned ready reserve force and supporting our commercial sea lift. I'll start by discussing the merchant fleet. Last year, some of you may be aware, the Maritime Administration helped unveil a congressional gold medal for the merchant mariners of World War II. This medal honors the more than 240,000 merchant mariners who sailed in American convoys that President Roosevelt II called the arsenal of democracy. American merchant mariners and American ships delivered supplies we needed to defeat tyranny during World War II. But it's important to note that at the beginning of the war, our fleet was dwindling and had to be rebuilt at great urgency to meet our war needs. Oh, by the way, that also happened at the beginning of World War I. After World War II, we owned most of the world's shipping tonnage. However, today, while approximately 70% by weight of the export cargoes that enter and leave our country by the sea, commercial vessels sailing under US flag account for less than 2% of these cargoes. In 2012, we had 106 US flag vessels in foreign trade. 4 years later, there were just 77 vessels in international trade sailing under the US flag. So today, we're back to 85 vessels trading under the foreign flag. US flag, foreign trading, commercially operated vessels, 85. This is still a tiny fraction of the number of ships that were sailing under our flag after World War II, and an even tinier fraction of the ships that exist globally. Keep in mind all of the things we had to deal with in the context of supply chain resilience during COVID. And think about how important our import and export trade are, and how that might have been different if we had had a larger fleet of US flag vessels to help us retain control of our own destiny there. About 75% of our trade by weight is carried on the top 5 flags of convenience: Panama, Liberia, Marshall Islands, Singapore, and Bahamas. Not a surprise. China and Hong Kong flag vessels carry about 10% of that trade. But the US flag carries only about 1.5% of our trade. So our US flag vessels carry, again, less than 2% of our import-export waterborne foreign commerce. I'd offer that that hardly meets the statutory requirement that the United States have a merchant marine sufficient to carry a substantial part, quoting that, of the waterborne export and import foreign commerce of the US. So that's a challenge. And many of you know, the interest in growing the US flag fleet is there and remains there, but it's part of a much larger process. Leading up to that, the numbers of vessels we have a significant consequence in the number of mariners we have because of the number of billets at sea. MARAD's most recent study assessing mariner availability, which was done in 2017 at the request of Congress, so it's getting long in the tooth now, estimated there was a shortfall of approximately 1,800 mariners, and that's assuming they are all willing and available to serve when called upon, and also assuming an uncontested environment, meaning no one's shooting at you. So things have changed. We've worked through a COVID pandemic, and recent anecdotal evidence as a result of that indicates the shortage is actually worse. I can tell you that whenever industry or labor comes in here to see me, and that's often, the issue of availability is repeatedly raised. The merchant marine, like every industry, has been profoundly affected by COVID. And we, of course, are very interested in trying to sort out exactly what our challenges are, where are we short, what skill sets are needed, and where should we focus to help improve capacity and opportunity. In September of last year, we convened a forum here at the Maritime Administration within DOT that was attended by more than 75 industry stakeholders, carriers, other stakeholders, labor, educational institutions, to discuss the mariner shortage. Among many issues that came to the fore, providing a better work-life balance for today's merchant mariners, comparable to the quality of work life that workers in other sectors of the economy enjoy, as possible, sailing aboard a ship is fundamental to make any headway in mariner availability. COVID drove a lot of people away because they had to spend a tremendous amount of time at sea in an unexpected way. People were trapped on vessels in yards overseas and forced to remain there during COVID lockdowns. Reliefs didn't appear. COVID restrictions kept people aboard. It was a tremendously difficult time for mariners who were frontline workers throughout the pandemic. We are working here at MARAD to help everybody in the maritime industry understand that mariners do not just work on the ships, they live there, and mariners deserve a commitment from their employers, and industry knows this. We talk about this with them all the time, that work-life balance, including safety at sea and digital connectivity and a modern quality of life, are critical to bringing people back. Also, and this is an interesting one that I'm particularly interested in because of my Navy experience, but there's certainly an interest in basic human resource managerial strategies like career planning for mariners and support for professional development that are essential. I have had mariners ask me about the options to go from sea to shore and back, and I have talked to industry leaders about it. They know it's an issue. They don't know how to deal with it more broadly. Of course, working through the complexities of unions versus employees that specifically work for a company versus licensed and unlicensed, but what could the choices be, and how can we think about a career path at sea and ashore that helps people move through both worlds without rolling ashore and staying there for a long time? Options, basically. And I know in the military, we thought about this, we spent a lot of time, same thing, trying to retain people. And we found that with different seashore rotations, we had better success with retention. As simple as that. We'd also like to ensure, and know it is critical to ensure, that mariners' working environments are safe, and the maritime industry is a place where every mariner can succeed on the basis of professionalism and skill. If you attended any of the events on January 23rd, you're very familiar with the Every Mariner Builds a Respectful Culture program that we rolled out in December of 2021. And I'm pleased to announce that since the 23rd of January, when we were there with Coast Guard Admiral Arguin and Coast Guard Investigative Service Director Jeremy Gauthier, 2 more carriers have joined Embark, meaning that now all 16 carriers in MS Maritime Security Program and the Cable Security Program, which are our 2 programs we're running right now, we're about to start a third, I'll talk about that in a minute, they are all enrolled in the program. So that's a big step forward, and we're happy to have that be the case. Also, as we discussed last month, it is now the law of the land that the carriers must enroll in Embark to be able to train cadets from the Merchant Marine Academy. And that is absolutely critical to your ability to continue to sail on US flag vessels for your sea year, which we know is of critical importance to you. And midshipmen have repeatedly pointed out to me how important that is and how vital it is to your training, and how important it is to your ability to sail in the future on US flag vessels. It's also the law of the land that ocean-going vessels must include sexual assault prevention and response provisions in their safety management systems. We've talked about this before, a critical step forward. You should also know that under the Coast Guard Authorization Act, a number of items that are also in Embark are now applied more broadly across the fleet. So Embark will be a portion of a larger application of safety requirements and safety management system requirements. We know culture change is happening, and I made clear this morning to those whom I spoke with that they have critical roles to play in supporting and ensuring continued change and evolution. It's essential to the continued success of the Merchant Marine. So what else are we doing to strengthen the Sea Lift enterprise? I talked about federal Sea Lift, and I'll talk about some of our programs that we maintain. Remember, we're operational and promotional, and the operational part is maintaining and now building also vessels. MARAD's in its 77th year of maintaining a reserve fleet of ships, the Ready Reserve. It's 45 vessels today. They are on a 5-day notice to move, or reduced operating status. They are stationed at ports around the nation, and they must be ready again, up, engines up and ready to go, full crew within 5 days. Some of you may have spent some time on a Ready Reserve vessel during your sea years. If not, you may in the future. We encourage that, and we know midshipmen do sail on them and get interesting opportunities there as well. We have had several ships activated in support of Ukraine operations. We have 2 ships active today and a third coming online that's supposed to sail today or tomorrow. So there's actually a lot of movement in the ships right now. But as I said earlier, old ships, the average age of these vessels is 43 years old. Some of them are steam vessels. We have the largest fleet, I think, of steamships in the world. I'm a steamy owl, so I'm perfectly happy to go visit the steamships. But what's interesting about them is most of the people in engineering on those ships have gray hair like me. And so that's a dying skill set in some circumstances, although nuclear powered vessels are steamships too. And so as you join the fleet, you will be moving on to other opportunities and other kinds of vessels. And our focus is to continue to modernize the Ready Reserve. In that context, we have purchased 2 vessels to begin that, supported by the Department of Defense. This is part of their program, a buy used setup. The 2 vessels are Honor and Freedom. That's their old names. They belong to ARC, American Roll-On Roll-Off Carriers. They have joined the Ready Reserve Fleet as the Cape Arundel and the Cape Cortez. They add together more than 32,000 square feet of total sea lift capacity and 316,000 square feet of military cargo capacity. We live and die by square footage in the Ready Reserve Fleet and a Transcom need world. All these vessels were purchased using commercial best practices, and they are being upgraded in US shipyards to meet additional capacities that we require. The work should be completed this spring, and they will join the Ready Reserve Force. We are continuing to buy ships, and those of you who are very close and following industry know that the timing to buy used vessels isn't terrific, especially if you want ro-ros. They're quite popular. That means they're quite expensive. However, we are nearing the purchase of 3 more ships, newer roll-on roll-off vessels that will join the RRF, and we have authorization to purchase 9. And you should know that the Department of Defense and Transcom wants us to keep going. So we will do so. I should note that these ships are purchased under a vessel acquisition manager strategy, in which we work with Naval Sea Systems Command and evaluate the vessels, visit the vessels, consider them and their capabilities and context, and make a joint decision with DoD on how to proceed and move forward. So we aren't making this decision ourselves. The vessel acquisition manager is managing that for us, and it has been decided by a DoD executive committee to move forward. Also, in the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act, and someday you may find yourself dealing with budget, so I'm using all the words. MARAD was directed to develop a ro-ro ship design for the construction of 10 new vessels for the Ready Reserve Force in 2024. Some of you might say, why would you build new ships that you're going to put in a reserve capacity? I would submit that if we have new ships, they won't be spending a lot of time in reserve, that they'll be called and used far more often. But it also, in context with buying used, gives us more flexibility if we choose to go in that direction. The NDAA directs us to enter into a vessel construction manager contract to build these ships, following the management model that we are currently using to build the national security multi-mission vessels. However, this is a big however, no funding was appropriated in FY23 for this program. So we will be thinking and planning about how we would execute this program should we receive funding in the future. It is still an incredible responsibility that we've been given, and a vote of confidence in the ability not only to maintain ships, but for us to oversee their construction in a successful way. And to me, the fact that we even got so far as to put this kind of language in an authorization act, even without an appropriation, is a pretty big step forward. And you know, Congress is very interested in this process. Why? One reason why is it is much faster and much more cost effective. We've shown that with the NSMVs. So in addition to operating a Ready Reserve Force, we implement several critical programs to support commercial sea lift, which you are probably quite familiar with. Again, I mentioned this earlier, Maritime Security Program and our cargo preference programs, and a new tanker security program. So Maritime Security Program, what does that mean? Our Ready Reserve Fleet provides effective and rapid sourcing of additional vessels to support the Navy's existing military sea lift command support, but even the Ready Reserve Force and DoD sea lift capabilities are not enough to sustain a prolonged military deployment overseas. We would need the support of commercial US flag international carriers, which will be essential to be able to meet a full-on strategic sea lift mission requirement. We've shown this in all of our American wars. This was most recently done in the first Gulf War, although we had a lot of time to ramp up. And so different kind of circumstance. The Maritime Security Act of 1996 established this program. We support a fleet of, partially support 60 modern privately owned US flag ships. You have probably sailed on some of them to meet US DoD contingency requirements. 3.4 million square feet of cargo space, which is the highest level we've had in the program's history. And we employ 2,400 mariners, US mariners. So you probably sailed on some of these ships. If you haven't, you will. They each receive a small stipend that partially covers their operating costs per year. Right now, that stipend is $5.3 million. Industry would love for it to be higher. And again, these ships operate in international trade, and they have access to US cargoes. So they have access to mandatory DoD cargo preference. Everything that's shipped by the Department of Defense must go US flag. 50% of everything that is shipped by civilian agencies must go US flag. The whole nuance of the 50% is rather interesting. Someday we can talk about that in a lot more detail if you would like to do that. But the challenge here is ensuring that we ship US flag those commodities that we are shipping as a US government entity that must be carried by US flag vessels. And the MSP program is a way to ensure those US flag vessels are available to be used for this process, with a stipend that helps them cover the additional cost of maintaining US flag, which we know is much more expensive to operate. Our mariners are more expensive, our insurance is more expensive, our safety requirements are more expensive. So, tanker security program, I told you I'd talk about that, a new program. 2020, the National Defense Authorization Act directed a study that found a substantial risk to our nation associated with heavy reliance on foreign flag tankers. And I should note that when Teddy Roosevelt's fleet sailed, there were not enough US colliers, coal carriers, US flag vessels to be able to support the coal needs of that fleet. And they had to resort to chartering foreign flag vessels to follow them along and supply the coal they needed to be able to steam around the world. So today we are also counting on foreign flag vessels. However, in a contested environment with a very long supply line, they may not be available. This study showed that. So in response, we created, at the direction of Congress, a tanker security program. Modeled on the Maritime Security Program, comprised of active, commercially viable, and militarily useful privately owned product tank vessels. At the end of last year, we worked through a lot of the paperwork needed to make this program functional, and now have allowed vessels to apply. That application period is open through February 17th. So something less than 10 days away, maybe exactly 10 days away, to join, to be some of the first 10 vessels. Technically, there will be 8 spots. There are 2 vessels that are under MSP that are tankers. They will apply to move over into TSP. They have actually submitted that application. And so eventually we will be competing 2 additional spots in the Maritime Security Program as well. We want to get the tanker security piece underway first. So we're really excited about this. We're starting to get applications in. It's pretty arduous. It comes in a big box, just so you know. And we are anxiously awaiting the end of the day on the 17th so we can close this out and work through the process to award new TSP agreements, which will increase the number of tankers under our flag. We have funding to bring in a total of 20 tankers, 10 in 2023, and an authorization to bring in 10 more in 2024. The funding was appropriated in 2022 and 2023 for those of you who are keeping track. So 10 this year is the goal, and an additional 10 next year. And of course, what do they need? They need mariners. They need tankermen. They need people trained to operate those vessels, which is a unique skill set. And I know some of you have sailed on tankers and you're very interested in that. So more coming there, more opportunities coming. And I should also note that MSC is also right now undergoing a long-term charter, which is also bringing in more tankers to support some of their Red Hill needs. And I think we'll see more activity there too. So suddenly tanking and US flag is of high interest. And there are other nuances with these ships. They will be ultimately console capable. That requires rigs on them, which will need to be installed. They will need to be manned. They will need to be trained to So some interesting opportunities in that context coming our way very soon. You may find yourself sailing on or working on tankers that enroll in TSP. And I hope you remember, that we've worked really hard to make that possible for you. So as I close, I've been talking for a while here. Let me reiterate a key piece framework in which to see the critical importance of the U.S. Merchant Marine. Providing strategic sea lift. By providing strategic sea lift, our Merchant Marine constitutes our nation's fourth arm of defense. It has been historically organized, trained, and equipped to provide three essential functions: sea control, power projection, and maritime security. Our Merchant Marine, including ships under U.S. flag and our U.S. mariners, is absolutely critical to strengthening our national and economic security and expanding our world presence. The Maritime Administration is working to ensure our mariners have the ships and training and resources they need to meet evolving sea lift needs, and that the logistics needs in contested waters, of which General Van Ovos warns, are there. We also, of course, work to make sure that not only the Department of Transportation understands the need here, and I can tell you I spent 90 minutes with the Deputy Secretary last Friday going over the Ready Reserve Force and a longer, more detailed version of what I've talked with you all about today. And that is leading to a classified version of the same conversation, which we will have next week. So there's tremendous interest here within the department, and of course, within the Department of Defense. With the unprecedented commitment that this administration actually has to this program, we are growing our fleet, recapitalizing the Ready Reserve, pioneering new models to build ships on time and on budget, all a testament to many people in the Maritime Administration and other stakeholders throughout government who have worked to build that program over a number of years, and supporting our mariner pool, as well as advancing critically needed culture change throughout the industry. So through these efforts, we're working to deliver a sea lift enterprise ready to deliver for our nation. And that's where you come in again. We need you to sail. We need you to sail U.S. flag. I'm kicking the table. So we do in the Navy. That's like a hint. Here comes the answer. We need you to sail U.S. flag, and we need you to apply your extraordinary education, expertise, and potential to support the maritime industry. And in so doing, contribute to our economic security and our national security. Your options are limitless. I told you you were in high demand, and you are. And when you start talking with carriers, and some of you probably already have, your eyes might be widening at what they're willing to offer, and that's a good thing. I also understand that many of you who sailed on MSC last year found that to be an interesting experience and are considering sailing with the Military Sea Lift Command. And they are thrilled to have you, and we are excited that you are thinking about that option too, of course. The education you have received at the Merchant Marine Academy means you're ready for anything. And we need the skills and commitment you bring to ensure that the nation is ready with the sea power we need to meet any challenge. So thanks for the opportunity to join you today. And I think there are some questions, and I'm happy to take them. So thanks very much. Thank you, Professor Hansen.
Well, thank you very much. I love your talk. Very informative. I have to be a little shamelessly promote our shipyard management capstone program. And actually the topic for our 2023 graduates was they had to plan vessels that would meet the MSP program. So we have a variety of conrows, ro-rows, heavy lift, and a tanker. So it's we'd love to share those with you as we finish up the projects in April.
Actually, we'd love to see them. I would personally love to see them because I think they'd be very interesting as we think through things we need to think through, particularly in the context of the legislation that was authorized but not appropriated. I'd just be fascinated to see what the state of the art and in the industry is thinking. So particularly from the students and with the creativity that I know they brought to it.
Yes, they've been working very difficult, very hard on their difficult project. Okay, I think I did submit some questions to you. I have a couple of questions coming up in the chat. I think for the first one that we did submit to you, that you really answered, what is the Maritime Administration strategic vision for US flag shipping? I think that's covered in your talk.
Certainly talked about it a great deal. And I think I should add that there are many competing factors in expanding the US flag fleet. The need is unquestionable, but we have the balance of, to have the fleet, you need cargoes. To have cargoes, you need cargo preference to work. And to have cargoes, you need the US flag fleet. Basically, they're mutually supportive and they have to grow together. And we also need mariners as the third leg of that triangle. So need more ships, need the right kind of ships, need more mariners to man them, and need cargoes for them to carry for this to be effective.
Okay, thank you. The second one that I have is, in order to create more opportunities to the US merchant mariners, what, if anything, can we do aside from the Jones Act to encourage ship owners to run American flag ships?
So that's a good question also. Thank you for that question. It gets back to kind of the triangle or the triumvirate I was talking about. So, and you mentioned Jones Act, which is very strong, and I should add that there are 92 international meaning blue water sailing vessels that support Jones Act on both coasts, really, Pasha and Matson predominantly on the West Coast, and certainly Toad on the East Coast and in Alaska. So lots of options there. But if you want to grow the US flag fleet, you have to have enough cargo. So we're DOD, we're at 100%. Civilian cargo, which is every other agency other than DOD and the Import-Export Bank, we're at 50%. So at one point that was 75% for food aid, not that long ago. And when in the early mid 2000s, that was dropped to 50% for food aid, people left the flag. And ships said, carriers said, hey, we don't think we have enough cargo, so we're going to flag out. We did last year offer an option to Congress that did not have a cost, which waived a 3-year rule that ships flagging in under US flag must wait to carry the civilian side cargo, so non-DOD. If you flag like the tankers, they're going to carry military cargo, they can flag right in and carry military cargo. But if you are something else and you want to flag in, you do now still have to wait 3 years to be able to carry US flag cargo. So you flag in to be able to carry US flag cargo, but then you have to meet all the US flag standards for international trading vessels. So it means not built here, but everything else, registered, crewed, etc. here, flagged here. But you have to wait 3 years under US flag before you can carry civilian cargo. So we introduced legislation to eliminate that wait, so you could carry civilian cargo right away. And also to say that you had to stay in the flag 3 years, because there was some discussion about, well, if the market's good, I'll flag in, and then a year from now, things aren't so good, I'll flag right back out, and that would be problematic. That legislation did not pass. It was not considered. Will we try again? I don't know. We have to go through the whole process again, so we'll see. But that's an opportunity to expand and carry different kinds of cargo. And one of the things we hear from agencies, I should note, I wrote a letter to all the agencies and said, here's what civilian agencies, here's what cargo preference is, here's who to call if you have questions. I can say that we've gotten some interesting answers. But one of our challenges is the two biggest shippers, which is USAID and USDA, need a certain kind of carrier. And if there aren't enough of them available, they ship foreign. And there's no limit on who they can ship with. They can use any flag they want. So they can ship on Chinese flag if that's the cheapest rate and that's going where they want to go. So the ability to get more ships in that could support their needs might be helpful, and that would help us grow the fleet. But there has to be a market for it. Carriers aren't going to come in if they don't have some kind of guarantee that they're going to have a market for their ships to make them viable commercially, or that they're going to be able to get an MSP slot or a TSP slot or a CSP slot and get some additional stipend there. So it's very complicated. A lot of factors have to come together for this to work. And so we'll see if some do. and over time. But certainly TSP is going to help us grow the flag, particularly in the tanker world. And we'll see what authorizations come beyond the next 2 years in that capacity as well. So we know the number of tankers needed is actually much higher than 20.
Right.
But again, they have to have cargoes. They can't just sit there. They got to have something to do, or they're not going to, they'll get a stipend, but it won't cover their operating expenses. So that's what makes it viable.
Okay, the next question, and this was from one of my students in class, and it goes hand in hand with the oil, I don't know if I want to call it crisis with the conflict in Ukraine, that the US is exporting a lot of oil, sending it to Europe, and then producing oil. So the question was, can students work on a US asset, such as an oil rig, which is flagged under the Marshall Islands, which is a US protectorate, after graduation?
So to be clear on this, and I don't want to burst anyone's bubble, but an oil rig flagged under the Marshall Islands is not a US flagged vessel. And Marshall Islands is not a protectorate. We do have a treaty with them. They are a flag of convenience, the end. So our preference certainly, and your obligation is to sail US flag. And like I said, we need you and they need you. However, there are other opportunities. There are opportunities working in US shipyards. There are opportunities in some cases working in Navy shipyards. And so to that end, please send an employment determination request to MARAD's compliance office. Dr. Kumar and his staff will be happy to work with you on that. We have received some already for this year's class, and we can help people work through those things. Also, through your shipboard training department, we have retained a career service provider who can help you find opportunities if you feel that you are not finding opportunities that are satisfactory to you. I believe they've visited the academy recently, Core Consulting, but if you can't reach them or weren't there when they visited or want to make more connections, we can help make that connection for you as well as your shipboard training department can help make that connection to that group with you. So US flag is certainly the preferred option. And it would appear there's lots of opportunity there right now. And and I'll just leave it at that. So
Okay. And
questions? MARAD's compliance office. Thank you.
Thank you. You also just answered the next question about, and that would have been about the waiver. All right, so moving on to the next one. What is the Maritime Administration strategic vision of US ship construction to be able to compete with China?
So that's a great question. And that was part of our discussion on Friday with the Deputy Secretary. Certainly, as you are all very well aware, this is kind of a danger sign right now for the US. Do we have the capacity we need to build ships? What if we wanted to ramp up what if we needed to ramp up our capacity like World War II? That is a question. That is a question. And I think you all probably know the answer is pretty shaky. What we see as a challenge right now, particularly regarding maintaining our vessels, is a shortage in dry dock capacity. In particular, we, the Coast Guard, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Navy, Military Sea Lift Command, we're all competing for the same dry dock capacity, and there just isn't enough of it. And when you get into the point of trying to put older vessels in dry docks, inevitably, whatever you plan to do, when you get in the dock, there's more. So you're delayed, and then there's a cascading effect of challenges. And so all the people who are doing the shipyard management degrees are learning all about that kind of challenge. But the bottom line is there's not enough dry docks, and we, the government, we have to do a better job of aligning ourselves and prioritizing and sharing and scheduling. So big challenge. China subsidizes heavily. They subsidize their construction, they subsidize their operation, they subsidize their ports, they subsidize their shipyards. Not only do they subsidize heavily, but they are buying up properties around the world, inserting themselves into ports globally, into terminal operations globally, so that they have control in a lot of different circumstances. And this is a challenge. This is a challenge and of great concern. So the answer is, what do we do about this? And I can tell you that in the NDAA, we were tasked with coordinating across a number of different agencies to look at the impact of chips and hardware in cranes and other things constructed in China. And if there is a threat there, this is not new news, it's been reported in the open press. But we've been directed to write a report, which we will be leaning heavily on CISA and other agent Coast Guard who have done a lot of work in this space already in the cyber context. So there's definitely a concern. There's a concern in Congress, there's a concern within the administration. But at the end of the day, China subsidizes heavily, back to that point, and that makes things quite challenging.
Okay, so here's another one, and this relates to all people on the ship, not just the engineers and mates. With a shortage of sailors in the industry, how does MARAD plan on attracting and incentivizing young people to join the U.S. Merchant Marine so the U.S. is not forced to outsource a significant portion of its maritime workforce? So this would be, other members of the crew also included.
So I would say, speaking of industry shortages, there's a shortage of, this is a universal challenge, whether it's McDonald's or truckers or rail or any kind of service industry, certainly maritime, there is a shortage of workers. Not only is there a shortage of workers, but workers don't stay where they are. They move around, they don't like one thing, they jump and leave and go to something else. And that is a part of kind of the world we are living in right now. So in the context of thinking about how do we incentivize and how do we promote, kind of gets to the foster, promote, and develop, and working with all of the stakeholders within the industry, carriers, labor, educational institutions. We have a Centers of Excellence program that is run by Dr. Sashi Kumar and MAR 600 that designates educational institutions. We're working with K through 12. We're working with everything from Tall Ships America to Sea Cadets to maritime high schools, as best we can, coordinating across industry and across labor. So we can't do it alone. They can't do it alone. A discussion that I was a part of earlier today, we talked about we need the Super Bowl commercial to show what's cool about the maritime industry, about the fact that you can see the world, the fact that you can, as we stabilize out of COVID, work for several months and be ashore for several months. Not like the Navy, you go on deployment, you come back, you got duty the next day. And so you can live in different places in the world and you can go to where your job is, and that gives you tremendous flexibility, which makes this industry for all of its participants, particularly those sailing, whether they're licensed or unlicensed, interesting and important, and that there are good salaries to be had and good skills to be developed. So it's getting that word out as many different ways as we can. And I would add that all of you as mariners and future mariners are also ambassadors for the industry. And so opportunities for you to go back to your high school or go back to your hometown or go to a club or an organization you're a part of and talk about what you do, that makes a difference as well. And I was talking to some folks earlier today who do exactly that. They spend a lot of time working with various different entities within the maritime industry, but one of the things they do is talk about their career experiences and then talk about the kinds of flexibilities the industry does offer and the education, the skill sets, and the salary that goes with it that come with those opportunities. So it's an all hands on deck effort. And we continue to work with, again, all the stakeholders out there to help pull things together. One thing I should add, in the Authorization Act under the NDAA, we had authority for a grant program on Dr. Kumar's world that would help us provide additional funds to support some of our educational efforts. That grant program was not funded. So we can put together how we might do it if we had more funding, but we'll have to wait for more money to really get into that from our perspective this year. But that doesn't stop a more collective effort across stakeholders, and we're very much engaged in working on that with a number of partners.
Okay, I know we're at the end of the time. We did get a number of questions come through the chat. I don't know if you have any time that you could spare us, or if you need to leave the meeting. You're muted. I still can't hear you.
Probably about 10 more minutes.
Okay, let me switch to what has come in on the chat. There was one question about the new tankers. Are they required to be built in the United States, or are they going to be built in foreign yards?
These are international trading vessels, so they are not required to be built in the United States.
Okay. Okay, is there a commitment to build new US flag vessels? Is there a corresponding commitment to shipyard, US shipyard? So no, I guess not at this time.
So US shipyards are, with exception of the 4 shipyards owned by the Navy, privately owned. And so they have options at their disposal, but they're not options that I can direct them to do. I would say there's a lot of interest within the industry. We've seen a couple of, I won't get into the details here, but yards being purchased recently with the intent of driving up their capacity and capability. So that's a good thing. There's 2 examples of that I can think of recently. Both of them are Gulf Coast area. So there's some options there. And a little known program, we have a program called Title 11 where we may issue or facilitate loans for vessels and shipyards, which is the point I'm making, to support new construction. We have designated offshore wind vessels of national interest, which is something we may do with that program based on 2019 legislation. And so we are working very diligently with the offshore wind industry, who is very interested in this program because we offer more attractive interest rates in this time of high interest rates. And that program called Title 11 may also be used to support shipyards, but we rarely have shipyards come in and ask for any funding under that program, and haven't had any since I have been here, which is granted hasn't even been a year, but that's an opportunity for some perhaps additional capacity for shipyards. We also have a small shipyard grant program that focuses on smaller yards. It predominantly works on helping them improve their capacity or upgrading their technology. So maybe they'll buy new welding capacity or new metal bending or cutting capacity, or additional lift capacity for a yard. So a small grant program, but it is actually been tremendously helpful in getting smaller yards, some things that they might not be able to buy on their own. There is a match, but it's certainly a much smaller part of the price than they would pay if they had to buy this equipment themselves. So 2 opportunities there that we can perhaps help shipyards expand. But again, as they are private facilities, we're somewhat limited there. So there might also be some aspect of a port infrastructure development program grant that might facilitate shipyard capacity. They would be working in concert with a port, and it would have to improve the movement of goods just based on the criteria,
Okay.
statutory criteria for that grant program. So that's less likely, but possible.
Thank you. I have one from a professor from the Marine Transportation Department, and she writes, "Thank you for your time this afternoon and for mentioning the topic of support for professional development and the need for merchant mariners to sail our ships. As mariners transition from shipboard to shoreside careers, the cost of maintaining a current license becomes almost prohibitive for some. I am fortunate that USMMA covers that cost of license renewal for me, but some merchant marine officers must pay a significant amount for training and recertification. I respectfully ask that you consider a merchant mariner reserve program separate from the SSO program that would subsidize the maintenance of licenses by shoreside merchant marine officers in exchange for an agreement to sail if called on to do so."
So that is, thank you for that question and thank you for that observation and recommendation. That is a concept that has been discussed in other forums. You might not be surprised to learn, and has been discussed in our conversations with industry and other stakeholders on what can we do the soonest to make an impact in expanding our mariner pool, working across organizations like NDTA and the Transportation Institute and others. So that has come up before, and thank you for bringing it up again. I am certainly personally, from talking to folks here at MARAD who have been renewing licenses, very much aware of the cost, which is considerable under some circumstances. So
Okay, do we have time for any more, or you're done?
I think,
Erica, the administrator has to jump to a new,
okay, Tom is my handler, so he's cut me off here. So thank you very much. And actually, this is Will Sheehan. Tom is his first name, but he goes by Will, which is his middle name. And he's joined us here on the bridge at MARAD as a special advisor to me and to Lucinda Leslie. So thanks, Will.
All right, well, thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing from you again. Thank you.
Thank you again to all of you for your time this afternoon. Professor Hansen, thank you so much. And thank you to Admiral Noonan and to the class of '69 for sponsoring this event. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.